We're really pleased to have everyone join us here today for our quarterly meeting. And if you'd like the agenda, you can click on the box right by my feet. So get comfy and please be ready to share your ideas, as we want these meetings to be about you, and we really are listening. So just a couple updates before we begin our discussion for today. First, Second Life birthday exhibit, 22 years, SL22B. The Second Life birthday has so much this year. Please check out our exhibit, and you can also join us to see a tour of other education and nonprofit groups' exhibits at a tour that's going to be given by our amazing Zri, and that's on Friday, this Friday, July 11th at 9 a.m. at the Nonprofit Commons meeting here in Second Life. There's the slurl, and you can copy that later if you're not familiar. Also, the Second Life Welcome Hub exhibit. You can find our exhibit at the Welcome Hub at this slurl. Our Info Center, which is named after the Thinkerer, now has a quest for our Info Center volunteers. They are assisting with a directory of educational sites in virtual worlds, starting with Second Life. But there are many other virtual worlds evolving that will be in our database and directory. Down in the basement of the Info Center, we have a sign that has a note card explaining the steps for the quest. It's gamified, and it highlights our Quest volunteer champions up to this date. The champions we have so far are Dee Dee Beaker, Malia Rose, Val Librarian, myself, Max Chatnoir, John O'Connor, and Roxy Nero. We would like to thank them for their good work in helping with the directory. And we hope those of you that are our Info Center volunteers will join the quest. And if you'd like to become an Info Center volunteer, please contact Sue Moon Magic or me, Val Librarian Greg, in Second Life. There's a sign at the front of the Info Center with more information about volunteering. You don't have to be formally trained, and it's a lot of fun. Next, a quick word about our ambassadors. You may know that the Virtual Worlds Education Consortium has ambassadors in Kitely, Wolf Territories, and Mindtest Minecraft. We're also working with Avicon to develop a presence there as well. We work with the VR Exploders, traveling across the metaverse pretty much every month. Midori Linden is our liaison for Second Life Education. I don't believe Midori could make it to our quarterly meeting today, but she's in close contact with us, really validating that Second Life supports education. And as you know, Midori has a monthly chat right here at the VWEC Fireside Deck at this same time of the month, 9 a.m. on Wednesday. It's the times that we don't have a quarterly meeting, because that's 4 times a year. So Midori's next Fireside Chat will be August 13th. Mark your calendar. So now for our quarterly meeting today. It's my honor to introduce Tom Boellstorff. He's a favorite speaker for so many who value the work that we can do in virtual worlds. He had planned to join us at the anniversary that we had in May, but technology reared its ugly head in a very bizarre way, and he was unable to log into his region. Even after all these years, we still sometimes have tech glitches. So Tom was so kind to offer to come another time, and we are excited that he was available to come for this quarterly meeting. Tom Boellstorff does not need a big introduction. We value that our quarterly meetings are to hear from you, and he was delighted to facilitate that today. Tom is a great friend to the educational community in virtual worlds. In fact, I bump into him sometimes across the metaverse as he goes on the VR Exploder expeditions. He's a professor in the Department of Anthropology at the University of California, Irvine. He conducted more than 2 years of fieldwork in Second Life, resulting in his book, Coming of Age in Second Life. I have a copy. He continues with projects Intellivison, Metaverse Ecologies, and I'm sure much more. He also spoke at an expert series here at VWEC in March of 2024, and that was regarding Intellivison. You can view it at this YouTube link on our YouTube playlist. Today, he's going to start with a few words about navigating the metaverse together. And Tom will also be leading our discussion today. So without further ado, I'm very pleased to welcome our great friend, Dr. Tom Boellstorff, aka Tom Bukowski. Take it away, Tom.
Thank you so much. And yes, sorry about the crazy technical problems that happened last time. But now I'm here and things are working, and I'm so happy and honored that that you have allowed me to be here to speak. And so this is a very weird talk that I'm going to do. It feels like selfish, but also a great thing in like this group of colleagues and friends, many of whom I have known for many, many years. So when we were talking about me coming today, this is a cut and paste from Ellie and Val's email, an upbeat message of hope that together we can help teachers, students, and lifelong learners navigate the metaverse by working together, which I thought was wonderful. And for me personally, as I'll explain in a moment, I'm feeling a little stuck and depressed or just frustrated because I'm trying to start this new research project, and I'm teaching at the same time, but also we're in the current world that we are in, where my university and the whole world is under attack right now. All these attacks on science and education, on the tech oligarchy, everything that is happening. And so I sort of want to like crowdsource my thinking with this amazing group of you all about what I'm trying to do in terms of moving forward on research, but it's obviously related to education. And I just have 10 slides, and this is already like the third one, because I'm going to make this very fast and in the spirit of what you just heard from the introduction, to make this more of a workshop or a conversation. So as you heard in that kind introduction, I've been in Second Life for 22 years now, I think. If you can click on my profile and see, I forget how long it is now. And my Second Life book, Coming of Age in Second Life, first came out back in 2008, which is hard to believe. And I did that methods book as well. I've done some really fascinating and wonderful work on disability in virtual worlds, working with virtual ability and a whole other bunch of folks. And I've done a lot with Drax, if you know Drax, doing films. And then I just got gloriously sidetracked into the history of technology and wrote a book with a colleague and friend of mine about the Intellivison video game system from the 70s and early 80s, and I've talked about that. And what I'm trying to start up now is a project that I call Metaverse Ecologies, that is about what can virtual worlds bring to thinking about and responding to climate change. Climate change is such an important topic, obviously, and right now we're in a moment where it's being attacked and there's climate denial happening. I actually just taught a new class at my university that I just called Change, about climate change, and it was really amazing to see what my students were thinking. I can actually share that syllabus, since this is a group of educators. Val or someone remind me, and I will put the syllabus on. But anyway, one thing that I am trying to do with this project is build on research in the anthropology of hope and sort of utopia as method. There's a whole thing out there that researchers do thinking about futures and hope, which is, I think, really important around climate change, where there is obviously so much despair and anxiety. And I really saw that, talking to my students as well. And so that sort of a sort of quick background and sort of where I'm coming from. I want to do this project in multiple virtual worlds, not just Second Life, but just to use Second Life as a moment for a start. I sort of have three starting points. How is Second Life being used with regard to climate change? And you could also put in Wolfgrid, Roblox, Minecraft. I don't mean it just Second Life, but I'm sort of using Second Life as a home base and then moving out from Second Life. And so how is Second Life being used to educate and advocate about climate change? And there's some amazing groups in Second Life and communities. How are climate change refugees? People using virtual worlds to forge community. I remember back when Katrina happened, there were folks from Louisiana building things in Second Life about that. And for all of these questions, what I really am trying to do to bring to the table is virtual worlds are different from Instagram or email or websites. The internet is not a unified entity, right? And virtual worlds are not the same thing as virtual reality, as we all know, as sensory immersion, the headset kind of thing, right? Because you can do virtual worlds with a VR headset, but you can also do them with text or a screen, like you're probably all doing right now, or nowadays you can do Second Life on your mobile phone, right? So interface is not the same thing as place. And I'm interested in interface, but what I'm really interested in is place. What can online place do around climate change that's different, right, from other kinds of online technologies? So the first thing I'm thinking about is how is Second Life being used with regard to climate change? A second one, and this is a more long-term thing that there are some scholars like Ben Abraham doing very important work on. How can the climate impact of virtual worlds, including Second Life, be reduced? Every avatar, every event has a carbon footprint. The carbon footprint of this meeting is way smaller than if we all got on an airplane and car and we're meeting in the physical world, with an ocean view. I mean, the climate impact is much, much smaller, but there still is a climate impact. And we know from the research of people like Ben Abraham, and I can actually give you his website, After Climate. He's done some of the most important research in this area, but we still have very incomplete knowledge about, let's say, if you double your draw distance, how does that affect climate impact, or how complex your avatar is. And it's complicated because of different devices, different computers, different internet connections, obviously. But there have been some important attempts to figure some of this stuff out for Xbox and PlayStation and some consoles. And so this is a sort of second area. And then the third thing is, how can virtual worlds or Second Life mitigate climate change? How can we use virtual worlds to reduce carbon emissions more broadly? And here, my starting point is that we don't want to let our horrible, improvised experiences, largely horrible, of COVID, determine the horizon of what is possible with virtual worlds and climate change. And specifically with reference to education, I used Second Life during the pandemic. It was extremely difficult. I had no support from my university. Onboarding, it was really complicated. Everyone was running off to Zoom. But we don't want that to be the horizon, right? Our COVID experiences, because in some ways, that sort of state of emergency is not very helpful or indicative of what could possibly, be there or be possible. And so, for me, and someone just asked about a copy of these slides after the presentation. I will do that, as well as my syllabus and a link to Ben Abraham's work. I will absolutely do all that. And so, like, at the heart, this is from a recent town hall that I just think it's a fun picture around AI, because AI is part of this as well, right? Obviously. But at the heart of this is online place. And sometimes I actually use online place instead of virtual world, because one unfortunate thing is, in English at least, The dominant meaning of virtual is almost, right? We're virtually home. We'll be home in 10 minutes, we're virtually home. But a virtual world is not almost a place. It is a place. It's an online place. And it's not almost something. It is something, right? We all know that, all of us. And climate change is about place, about our Earth, right? And about particular places. So climate change is about place. So what can online place contribute to climate change, which is also related to place? And so I have not been able to get this research going as much as I would like because of my Intellivison book and because of responding to everything that's happening with Trump and everything else at my university. But I'm getting it going, and I want to workshop ideas with you all and get you all interested and involved, because moving forward, I really want to get this going. And for me, I'm starting with what I know best with Second Life, and sort of moving outward, which means more collaboration as we get more worlds, because different virtual worlds have different affordances, different communities, right? And that's why I love hanging out with the Exploders. It's such an awesome group. And I actually have land in Wolfgrid, and there's such amazing work happening in Kitely. And I want to include OpenSim from the beginning, because around this question of climate change, which is about technology, but also about capitalism, obviously. Something I've said before about this project, those of us who are old enough to remember the 1990s and 80s and 90s and the early days of the internet, when it was mostly about universities and the military and government, and no one could figure out how to make money, and there was like a dot-com bust and all that kind of thing. We could be living in a world right now where the metaverse, so to speak, virtual worlds are 40% corporate owned and 40% nonprofit and 20% government. And if we think about the metaverse also as including things like Discord and Instagram and Facebook, because obviously those things are different from virtual worlds, but they are connected to virtual worlds, right? Email is connected to virtual worlds. That's how we set up this meeting. So it also, if you think about the metaverse more broadly, we could be living in a world where it was 60% corporate owned and 30% nonprofit and 10% government. But we live in a world where, I'll just make up a number, it's 99% corporate owned, right? And the nonprofit metaverse is so small. I think Wikipedia is like the only website in the top 100 that's not corporate. In our current moment, where the metaverse is so corporate dominated, the importance of worlds like Wolfgrid and OpenSim in general is so important, so we don't only think about corporate metaverse as determining the horizon of what is possible. And obviously, there's incredible nonprofit, activist, and creative work happening inside of corporate spaces, right? Whether that be TikTok or Instagram or Second Life. But I think that is something that's very important. Actually, a really interesting book that just came out by Mia Consalvo, who's a really wonderful researcher, and a couple of her colleagues. They just published a really wonderful book on microblogging. Most bloggers or streamers on, it's micro streaming. Most streamers on Twitch, right, on sort of online venues, have 10 or less people watching them, sometimes no one or one or two people. And it's this long tail, but it actually is the vast majority of what's happening on Twitch. But it's often invisible because the company itself and people more generally often focus on the big names, right? The Mr. Beast or whatever, the people who have millions of followers, the Kardashians, whatever. But what's the majority of what's happening is actually micro, much more small communities. And that's really important for many reasons, one of which being that nowadays they talk about how streaming is often talked about in terms of labor. And that's true. But when you go down that long tail to people with 5 or 10 followers, a lot of it's also about leisure and community and not simply labor. And I think in virtual worlds, I've talked about a metaverse of hundreds, scaling a metaverse of hundreds. Like Second Life is so amazing as an example where it's all of these amazing communities that are usually, there's 37 of us right now. It's not 10,000 people. And the tech industry is always so invested in bigger, bigger, bigger because that's how they make money. But significant and bigger, not the same thing. And making everything big is one reason why we have the climate change crisis that we do, obviously. And so I think looking at Second Life and at OpenSim is just incredibly important. And I'm very interested in Roblox and Minecraft and some of the bigger virtual worlds as well. But I think that's really important. And the kind of methods that I'm thinking about for this are, I do field work, right? Ethnographic methods, interviews, focus groups, but also what could be some creative methods that I and others have used before about design ethnography, building something, the incredible builds that you see in Second Life that are related to the environment, right? How could we build a utopian climate change future, right? There are groups like Utopia doing that already, right? And how can that be part of education and thinking of alternative futures around climate change, which once again is so important, I think, in our current moment in particular. And so this last slide, which I've shown before, but it's just as a kind of take-home point that motivates this whole project and thinking about climate change, and I think is also central to the whole idea of education and virtual worlds, is that one of the biggest confusions that still happens to this day is putting real and not real on a single line, and people will say IRL very briefly, in real life, I have to get back to IRL. But I know from being an anthropologist that when you talk to people, even though they say that as a phrase, they don't actually mean that only the physical is real. For my research and for my thinking about everything I do, sort of square one is that the degree to which something is real or not, or unreal, and the degree to which something is online or offline are two independent variables. So you need a four-way grid, not just a yes or no, kind of thing, because you don't want to assume that everything online is unreal. That's square D there. Because this is real, what's happening right now. The whole point of education, I could study Italian, I could take a class here and then go to Rome and talk to people. But what I would learn is real, right? And especially given the role of technology in surveillance and governance right now and economics, it is very, very real, right? It's very important that we are aware of that, right? Not everything online is real. If I'm a dragon, I eat you in an online game, that's not real, but some things are. And that same distinction applies to the physical world as well, because as we know from the study of games and play for centuries, Hollywood, movies, Halloween, dressing up, lots of things that are physical are not real. If I'm acting in a Shakespeare play and Juliet drinks the poison or Juliet stabs herself, that's not real, even though it's physical. And so thinking about the way in which these things are independent is a point of origin for me in thinking about responding to these issues around climate change with the metaverse. So I'm actually just going to stop there. This is really a very open-ended kind of thing compared to that Intellivison talk that I gave recently. It's night and day, right? Because that was a research project that had ended, has basically ended, and this is a beginning. I'm very much at a beginning. And so I would like to just say thank you, and let's stay in touch, and I'd love to pick your brain and work with you and think about this, particularly in this current moment, the challenges that we're all facing in different ways, obviously. I think to be in a space of hope and possibility with an amazing group like this, what can we do? And obviously, I don't just mean to limit climate change. I care about democracy and all of these other things. But as you all know, the key to success in research is focus. And so I'm using climate change not because it's the only important thing, obviously, but because it gives me focus to think about these issues that obviously have connections to broader issues of inclusion and democracy and better futures for all of us. So thank you. And I'm sorry that was brief, but I really, in the spirit of this meeting as well, let's just chat.
Thank you so much, Tom. Let's look in the chat and see if we see any questions coming up. That was really a great introduction to being hopeful about the metaverse. And Marley is saying we need a linguist to revamp language. We need more words for all of this. And Roxy's saying, yes, we need hope, thinking about the possibilities. I mentioned, I really liked your digging into this blurry line between multiple realities. We go all the time, even if you don't have an avatar, you can go, on your digital device and mentally you're elsewhere. So I didn't know if you've heard the term metamodernism. It kind of focuses on that oscillation that we move between multiple realities all the time. That is our life now.
I remember you talking about that when we were at the Digital Museum. So yeah, that's a great example. And actually, someone had mentioned about the linguist. My bachelor's degree is in linguistics. I'm a big language nerd. And one thing that I've tried to do is actually talk about, instead of virtual reality, VR, to call it sensory immersion, SI, instead, because the VR interface doesn't make things more real. And that's actually ableist. The idea that someone who's blind or deaf doesn't have as much reality is a problem, right? That sensory impairment means that you don't get to be as real. And the language matters. Those things can set you down a path, right? That is confusing or unproductive. So that's absolutely true. And I'm seeing, Sheila, those are making really great points as well. I'm going to scroll up and look at the chat. Sorry, I wasn't able to track the chat while I was talking. So Mason's question and other people keep chiming in as well, and this question of access, right? And I didn't show it in the talk, but my first two books are actually about Indonesia. That's where I did my original field work. And so, certainly thinking about the global South, but actually even, anywhere in the US or anywhere, we're in a world now where the digital divide works differently than it used to, right? Even most folks in Indonesia have some kind of basic smartphone, but access to different kinds of online experiences really matters. And so the question of access is a very interesting one, and that's something that I'd be interested in thinking about, right? Because as many virtual worlds, including things like Roblox or Second Life, now can be on smartphones, but then you can't build in the same way, right? What happens with those kinds of things? Actually, something I wrote about when I was doing work with virtual ability and working on disabilities, a lot of folks with disabilities of various kinds have more limited incomes, and in the United States, often there's barriers to work. People will lose benefits, and we would, Gentles here in the room, that often we would have experiences where folks who were disabled had to turn down their draw distance, right? Because either their internet connection or their computer or both weren't up to snuff compared to some others. And so having less income was literally disabling. You literally can't see as far, right? If you don't have as much income. And so I think that is, and the question of technology and class is obviously goes way beyond virtual worlds. So I think also this is a way to think about those questions of inclusion and technology more broadly, especially when we're in a world nowadays where it's often not a digital divide of not having access, but more of like what kind of access. So maybe if you have less income, you might be able to access a virtual, but you can't modify objects or something. So it's a really interesting area.
Yes, indeed it is. And I'm seeing a couple of questions, Tom, about AI coming into Second Life, Shiloh's asking, how is that going to impact Second Life's carbon footprint? And Zinnia mentions that her students worry about the ungreenness of AI, and how what do you have to say about that? It feels like AI may be harmful to the environment, and it's kind of blurry what's going to happen with AI.
Yeah, it's a moving target because there are, potentially some of these AIs like deep seek or whatever it was called that may not be as carbon intensive. Like we'll see what happens. But at present, the currently existing AI things that are out there are horrible in terms of their environmental use. One chat GPT query uses around half a liter of water, for instance, is the best estimate that someone at Caltech actually was trying to figure out. So the amount of data that they need and compute power is very ungreen. And so that question of AI is huge. And this is an area where, once again, the people like Ben Abraham, but in general, I want to try and partner even at my own university with engineers and other people working in these areas. Because, for instance, let's pretend that we were all working in an office. Us having this be our office meeting means that there 36 of us wouldn't have to get in a car or a bus and commute to the office. So you save the climate impact of all of that, right? However, let's pretend we're in a colder climate. You would be heating 20 homes all day, where if you went to an office, you'd only have to heat the one office, right? So what is the balance around that in terms of climate impact is still quite poorly understood. And so, so this goes beyond AI, obviously, but the AI is a hugely important area, and it's a challenge because the AI technologies are changing so fast, and they're having a couple like that DeepSeek one coming out of China, where it might be that it won't be as carbon intensive, but all of the dominant ones, Gemini, Chat, GPT, Claude, are just horrible, and we have pretty good data on how bad they are. But the data is imperfect, obviously, and that my students also were talking about that as well. Oh, Keeper, that's really interesting. Building your sim. And Marley, the attitudes about climate change, I know you've been interested. I'd be interested in a tour of that, Keeper. So get in touch with me later. I'll try and I'll save this chat as well. I don't know if it has to be fresh water, the things that are used to cool those data centers. I think that it is. Yeah, and Brian, that's right. The impact is there's a big challenge with climate change in general, but there's very smart people that work on this. Is you often have so many different variables, right? Different cars have different climate impact, different computers, different distances. So there's always a lot of variables involved. Yes, Marley, I've watched that film. Yeah, no, it's that's and that is, as an anthropologist, that is something that is very that is something, that question of attitudes is very, very important. Actually, I have a really great slide. Let me see if I can find it real quick. Thinking about how can we get people to think about the role of culture in climate change, and of attitudes in climate change, is something that is so important. So wait here, let me pull this in because of this wonderful thing that you have. I can probably just upload this like super fast. So take a look at this image. I have this on my syllabus. So this image, if you all can see, is annual carbon dioxide emissions worldwide from 1940 to 2023, so going back 70 years. And you can see all of the growth. But look up at the very end towards 2021. Do you see that V? Do you see that sort of drop that's there? Anyone know what that is? I would ask my students. That's right. That was the pandemic. And there was a very well noted drop. And some of those smaller drops are like the end of the Soviet Union, actually. But that big one is COVID. So we actually made a striking reduction in climate change emissions. And we didn't need any new technology to do it. It was about attitudes and social practices that we did because of COVID. And we don't want to have to take a pandemic to do it. But that drop did not require any amazing new technology. It wasn't about technology. It was about human social practices.
That leads to, Shiloh has asked, and I think we missed the question, is our individual footprint contributing to the Second Life carbon footprint? And I guess this speaks to virtual worlds that you're talking about individually, because that graph is powerful.
That's a great question. Sorry, I'm trying to keep track of the text as well. Thank you. And Sheila talking about Seattle and London. Yeah, absolutely, because people weren't driving around. But a really important topic that shows up around climate change that many people have written about is this relationship between individual actions and government policy and social policy. And right, because on the one hand, individual actions can make a huge difference, but on the other hand, it can't just be about individuals. It needs to be about governments and corporations and those broader kinds of things. So just to take one example, linked to climate change, in California where I live, we have a huge water crisis, right? And right now we're doing better, but it's because we've had good rain the last couple of years. But it's always, you never know, right? It sort of goes up and down, and so water is a huge issue. And in my city where I live, the city will pay you money if you rip out your lawn and put in California native plants or whatever, which I've done. And people try to not take as long as showers, right, and do all that kind of stuff. But in California, where I live, 80% of the water is going to agriculture. And that agriculture is mostly growing almonds and pistachios to sell to Asia. And vegetables like carrots that really shouldn't be grown in a semi-desert climate like California. And then industrial use is like another like 12%. The individual urban use of water is something like 5%. So taking the shorter showers and planting the native plants, you're reducing that 5%, and maybe you're reducing it to 4.5% or 4%. And that's wonderful, right? Our individual choices matter, but it's not addressing the 80% that is agriculture. And that has to do not just about farmers, it has to do with government policy around agriculture, right? And water. And so, and alfalfa being grown in New Mexico or whatever. And so so if we translate all of this to virtual worlds, that's a really interesting question. Like, what is the role of Linden Lab and of, Mojang, or whoever it is that owns Minecraft, and thinking about the role of corporate ownership and policy in addressing climate change, as well as individual avatars, changing their draw distance or not wearing fancy clothes or whatever. Because not all corporate or policy action is greenwashing, if you know that word, where a company does it to look good. But not all corporate action is greenwashing. Sometimes it makes a difference. And so that's a really, important issue. Okay, let me try and catch up on the chat. Sorry. The over-urbanization, and this is an interesting thing to think about with virtual worlds as well, like, building in virtual worlds and land in virtual worlds. I'm not super expert on this area, but having one reason I taught this class was it forced me to learn, better. But cities actually, there's a lot of research out there that cities are actually great for climate change. That compared to spreading people out with cities, you can actually do a lot to mitigate climate change. Now, if there's no trees in the city and it's super hot and people are dying because of the heat or whatever, obviously that's not great. So it's not, there's urban planning plays a role, but Innkeeper's putting in a really good, some good links. But there is quite a bit of research out there that cities actually can be actually very good for climate change. And if you know what's called like the rural-urban interface, that sort of suburban kind of space that's going up against the rural areas, that is actually the biggest area of risk for fire. It usually is higher water use. It also, impacting habitat for, animals and plants. So there's a lot of variables there as well that cities can actually play an important role in climate change and making them greener, right? And for so many of these things, it's not a simple yes or no, but it's how it's done. And Marley making these, this question about greed. And another area I've been learning more about is, the degrowth movement, right? And degrowth economics, and questioning the idea that that we always have to have more and more, right? As an anthropologist, for most of human history, the idea that you have to have an economy that's always growing is not the norm. And when capitalism started to take hold around the time of like Adam Smith, there were many economists who were like shocked by this idea. Like, why would you assume that things always have to go up because we have a limited Earth, right? And so Shiloh talking about, and there are people who've talked about, what would be the impact of having like an amazing wardrobe of 100 different outfits in Second Life, so I don't have as many in the physical world, right? Yeah, Danny Miller is actually a friend of mine, who did a very important early book on Facebook, but has also done really interesting work on consumption as well. And so that question of over-urbanization or cities, to me, that's super interesting because it also comes back to place, climate change and place. And we are sitting in a place right now, in Second Life. And there's something very profound about that. We all get that, right? Those of us who do a lot in Second Life. And that's something I want to think more deeply about and research more deeply about, not as techno-solutionism and keeping in mind questions of access and all of that kind of thing. But what can virtual worlds, what can online place bring to the table is something that I'm very interested in. And obviously this touches on education in so many ways. So I hope this doesn't feel off topic, but I actually think it really matters that about education in a very broad sense, in many different ways. Yeah, buying everything on sale. That's right. Yeah, place is important to education. And the post-truth, world, right, with how can virtual worlds combat disinformation and misinformation is a really important thing. Yeah, I know Setha. I should talk to Setha. I could try and bring Setha in. And anyone who wants to friend me, please do. I've friended most of you over the years already, but if I haven't, please do, because it makes it a little easier to stay in touch. And Val, just as a really important point that Val just made about the non-human agents, something that, and once again, it's not just me, but other people have been talking about, is human cultures have always had non-humans in them. So now we've got some different kinds of non-humans. But anthropologists have looked at domesticated animals and cats and dogs and pigs and yams and plants. The human has always been a multi-species project in a sense, right? Humans have always been human culture has always had non-humans in them. So what's similar or different around AI is going to be very, very important because obviously there's something very, very interesting. Shiloh, the cattle industry that's a really important thing. I had to educate myself more about climate change for my students, and it was shocking that most of them had not had any information about climate change since elementary school, even in California. It's amazing how little they knew. But the number 2 greenhouse gas after carbon dioxide is methane. It's around 12%, I think. I forget the number, I'd have to look it up. But what's very interesting is that methane clears out of the atmosphere within 10 to 12 years, whereas carbon dioxide is more around 100 years. It depends on, planting trees and other kinds of stuff. But a lot of researchers who study climate change talk a lot about methane, because if we reduce methane, we will see the benefit within our lifetime, very quickly. Actually, it actually comes out of the atmosphere faster than any other of the climate change gases. So it's just an interesting little tidbit there that I learned myself. And yeah, planting those sustainable forests and doing all of those things can make a difference. I think thinking about hope and the future and utopia as a method kind of thing. There's even that term protopia that some people have used that I think has some benefit as well, because the danger sometimes with ideas of hope or utopia or whatever is the kind of all or nothing, right? That we have to succeed 100% or give up. And when it comes to climate change, even like with this graph and what happened with COVID, any benefit is a benefit. Anything that moves the needle in the right direction is a movement in the right direction. And that can be empowering for everything that people are doing. Because, and yes, the greenhouse effect of methane is greater. The factor, it's not as high as the CFC other gases, but it's there. And so, anything that we do can make a difference, and sort of what could be then the role of that around as a way to think about this around climate change, so that we don't give up or feel that it has to be all or nothing. Yeah, and these changing habits. I mean, one of the things that's so distressing, if for those of us in the United States, about what Trump is doing, with the new bill, is that incentives make a difference, and attacking these climate change incentives makes a difference. The individual habit of putting on a seatbelt is really important, but what motivated that was also a law that you get a ticket if you aren't wearing a seatbelt. And those things make a difference. And people call it the nanny state, or there's debate about obviously any kind of government intervention, but those nudges play a role. And in the United States, there's huge subsidies for the fossil fuel industry still, and obviously in other countries it can even be worse. And so it's that relationship between individual choice and policy is very important, and just access to information. How can virtual worlds, how could Second Life, provide education in terms of access to information? I was shocked teaching my students last term by how little they knew about climate change. They cared, they were anxious, they wanted to do something, but they had almost no information about climate change. The information's out there, and I gave them all kinds of great links and stuff, but it's not always easy to find, and it nowadays is often, drowned or surrounded by so much misinformation. It was shocking to me, talking to my students about that, and they felt a lot of anxiety and confusion just about getting access to good information. And it's a challenge with climate change because you don't, I'm from Nebraska, so I know cows very well. I'm from the Midwest, but I'm from a farm family. But a real challenge around climate change is, on the one hand, it is the most complicated topic that we have. It is so many factors are involved, but in some ways, we already know everything we need to know. In some ways, it's simple, right? You put up the gases and they raise the temperature. And so in some ways, it's actually a very simple topic, and we know we don't need to, we know all we need to know in some ways, right? But in other ways, if you talk to someone who does climate modeling or studies all these things, it's incredibly complicated, of course, as well. Yeah, and Delia, one thing that I'm interested in, and I've done some around this already, but that I really want to do in the next 6 months is just really do more of a survey of getting to know the amazing work that's already happening in Second Life. Like I've done some of that already, but to really get it a better handle on that for myself and for others, because so many people have been doing creative work already around climate change education and climate change, and thinking about that kind of experiential learning, and sort of start with what's already there, because access is an issue, and Second Life can be hard to learn for some people, and all of that. But I think for me, one way to start is with what's already here, right? What are people already doing is obviously a great place for inspiration, just to see what is already out there and what's already happening. I'm reading through some of these comments. If I missed something, please, feel free to put it in voice or chat. I'm trying to see if I can. Zinnia had it. How can we focus on the good of virtual worlds and not the negatives? Oh, and Delia, thanks for that note. I would love to catch up. Let's do that for sure. But as Zinnia said, like, how can we, focus on the good and not the negative? And I obviously don't mean it as all or nothing. You can't ignore the negative. For me, it's in terms of sort of research design, I feel like I like the positive. I'm just that kind of person, and so I sort of want to study what's working or think about hope. But also, I think in the world of climate change, particularly right now, there's a real need for hope and thinking about possible futures when there's so much negativity and sense of going backwards, right? Or being stuck or even going backwards when it comes to policy or leadership, for sure, right? In so many parts of the world. And once again, being in the United States, that's really at the forefront right now. So I don't mean that it's that studying dystopia or the negative side is not important, because it obviously absolutely is. For me, it's also, once again, about research focus is at least as a starting point to think about hope and potential and what's out there, and then the negative stuff can be there as well. Yeah, can we be honest? Marley's asking about acting in accordance with our individual comfort, talking about what we eat and limiting physical world stuff, thinking about craft and repair and reuse. So many creative things that people are talking about here. And yeah, these impacts of like a family, depending the global south, depending on having a cow, and these are all really important points. It really is a fascinating thing about climate change, that on one hand, it's the simplest thing in the world, and on the other hand, it connects up to every other topic and every other issue, from income and poverty and class to education and gender and technology and politics. So it is intimidating and fascinating in that way, that it's both the most complicated topic that's out there, and then in a certain sense, it's the simplest topic that's out there. If you're, it's just this blue line on the graph behind me. So it's really interesting that way. Yeah, and we did learn about pollution when we were in grade school and we were younger. I think that's true. And I mean, we did some great stuff in the 60s, 70s, and early 80s. One thing around hope, and this is in my syllabus, and I will provide that syllabus. one thing I did for my students is I spent a week talking about the ozone layer. And the ozone layer was actually discovered at my university at UC Irvine. One of our professors got the Nobel Prize for it, Sherwood Rowland. And those of you who know about the ozone layer, it was a serious thing, right? I mean, it's healing right now, but it was a serious thing. And the Montreal Protocol that got rid of CFCs, still to this day in 2025, is the only United Nations treaty signed by every country in the entire world. It's the only one. Every country in the world has signed the Montreal Protocol. And we have phased out those CFCs, and the ozone hole is healing. And we don't have a whole lot of disinformation or conspiracy theories about it. And it has worked. And there's been some really good writing out there about what can we learn from the story of the ozone hole and the ozone layer, because there was a case where the world came together and still is, has come together, and we fixed something, and it's repairing itself. I have some good readings on that in my syllabus. And in terms of thinking about hope, the ozone layer is a really powerful story, and in some ways, it's simpler than the climate, but it was complicated too. And corporations fought it at the beginning. And there are really great examples. The Montreal Protocol, that's correct. Yep, is what it is. Acid rain is another example. But the story of the ozone layer is also really important, because what solved it was not telling people, don't buy the hairspray with CFCs, buy this other hairspray. Don't buy a refrigerator or whatever that uses, the Freon that has CFCs in it, buy this other one. It was not about individual choice. It was done at the level of governments and government policy. And that's what, with a lot of activism, right, involved from the grassroots. There's a lot of grassroots activism. But what did it was government policy at the global level, and we did it. And so I do think it is, it's obviously not a perfect example. It's not exactly the same, but there's a lot of similarities. And in terms of hope, I think that story of the ozone layer, my students found it very empowering, because it happened long ago enough that they didn't really know that history. They didn't even know that it was discovered at their own university. And they found that very helpful to think about how this, change can happen. It can be done, which I think is, once again, an important thing right now. And education is playing a big role in that. Education is playing a big role in that, because once again, with the ozone layer, we didn't have to discover, completely new technologies, because the alternatives that didn't include the CFCs were already around. Like there was some work done on them, but it was really more about education and policy. By the way, we know if you have other stuff on the agenda for today, just let me know when we need to wrap this up. So I'm just happy. I just love talking to you all so much. So I'm getting carried away. So just Ellie and Val, whoever, let me know when we want to wrap this up. Oh, good. We have a couple more minutes. Ellie has a couple things. Okay, good. And a bunch of you have IM'd me, and so please, I want to follow up with folks, and so I really appreciate that. And also, I forgot to put it, in addition to IMing me, you can always email me as well. There's my email. Oh, great. Thanks, Ellie. Oh, thanks for that footprint calculator. Yeah. There's a history to the idea of the carbon footprint, that it sort of came from the corporate world, and in some ways it was a PR thing to sort of take the emphasis off of corporations and put it onto individuals. So the idea of calculating an individual carbon footprint was sort of a corporate thing pushed at the beginning, but now it's sort of taken on a life of its own, and it can be very helpful. Like, it's an interesting story that way, that idea of looking at the individual carbon footprint, because because the corporations didn't want you looking at the corporate footprint. But it is important. And it would be interesting, as one idea, like, oh, no problem at all, John. We'll stay in touch, and thank you so much. Is like, how could we someday have a calculator for your avatar footprint? That would be interesting. Okay, well, let's just wind up now, and thank you all so much. I really appreciate you tolerating me with this rambling or whatever kind of workshop space, but I really appreciate it, and there's a real joy for me in being able to talk about something that's not all worked out yet, because I get to learn so much more, and so I really appreciate this. And please do stay in touch with me. And this is such a challenging time for all of us, and I'm so worried about my students, and we're doing so much for our international students in particular. And funding at the university, we have huge challenges that we're all facing in the world of education. But I'm not going to give up hope. That's why I'm building on hope here. And so, us banding together is one way to respond for sure. And this organization is such a gem for doing that. It's so important, and I am so thankful that it's here and for all the work that all of you do. So thank you so much, and we will all be staying in touch, and I'm always happy to come hang.
Oh, thank you, Tom. We so appreciate the effort, the gallant effort that you took to share all of this with us. And what an excellent discussion that leaves us so much to think about. So more conversation as we go along, for sure. And I also wanted to thank for asking about Tom's slides and his syllabus, etc. We have a sign on the wall on the side of the deck for Tom to add his slides and syllabus, and we will make that easy for you to pick them up. And I can share that with you. In closing, we do have a few announcements. We want to remind you of our expert series, which takes place right here at the Fireside Deck twice a month on Fridays at 1 p.m. SLT. We often take a week off in the summer and will only have one in July, but definitely one you won't want to miss. Our next expert series is Friday, July 23rd, featuring the always interesting Gentle Heron talking about misinformation in science. Oh, please note that what Tom has just posted. Gentle's presentation is derived from Understanding and Addressing Misinformation About Science, a publication of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences, published in late 2024. She shared this with the NPC, and we were sure you would want to hear about it as well. You can find more details in the note card and the sign on your right. We also wanted to remind everyone about the VWEC that is being held in August. You can find the sessions here or sign up to present a session. You can still sign up if you're interested. And I put the link in the chat. There are several of our members who are doing sessions, but our VWEC session is on August the 8th at 1 p.m. for our expert series that week. We will be doing a tour of the VWEC Edgeverse region as outreach for other educators who might not have heard of us. However, we will be sharing each area's updates, and we hope it will be interesting to you as well. We also have our summer of fun going on, and I just recently saw a very interesting post about how our brains work around education, and I can't wait to get it up here. Our theme this year is Summer of Fun, and in that light, those of you who would like to learn about video, machinima, are going to be excited to know that our wonderful videographer, Fran Coolhaven, will be offering a class to help you learn the basics of machinima, which is video in virtual worlds, using a free screen capture tool, OBS. They will be Monday, July 21st and Monday, July 28th at noon, though he can do them later if needed. So just give him some feedback on that as to your availability if you're interested. He's still preparing the class, so we can let you know if it's 1 or 2 classes as he gets that all worked out. Please let me know if you're interested, and I will pass your information to Fran, or you can let him know directly. And if you have a fun activity that you would like to host here at VWEC this summer, please let Val, Dodge, or me know, because we would love to have you do something with us. Okay. And we also have remodeled the VWEC Commons to reflect our belief that fun is educational. Grab a friend or go by yourself and check it out. There's the landmark. There are lots of games to play on your own or with a friend. And also, our amazing Ari is on the piano there each Thursday at 11 a.m. SLT. It's a great way to unwind and enjoy some music and even dancing if you are into that. All are welcome. Yes, they are. And you don't want to miss that. It's so wonderful. Our VWEC Expert Series YouTube playlist is here, and this session will be on that playlist. Please note that all of our meeting archives are on the website at this link. Finally, our next quarterly meeting will be Wednesday, October 8th at 9 a.m. SLT. Please mark your calendars. Our plan is to go over all the feedback you have given over the course of the last few quarterly meetings and update you on our progress, as well as see if there is more that you would like to see. And finally, please remember, you are an important part of VWEC. Thank you again, Tom, and everyone for coming. We'll see you all again soon.